Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu sallam wa barak ala nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So tonight, with the day of Eid and Salat al-Eid and Khutbah al-Eid upon us next week, inshallah ta'ala, I thought it would be appropriate to discuss some of the rules and regulations and some of the etiquettes of the Eid of fast breaking. And this is something that we do every year, but because we only do it once a year, sometimes we need to be reminded to make sure that we take full advantage of the day of Eid in terms of doing those things that we are expected to do, and also doing those things which, if we do them, will obtain from Allah additional rewards and will be from the people who follow the sunnah of His Prophet ﷺ as it relates to Eid. So let us begin first and foremost with a definition. The definition of al-Eid. The word Eid in Arabic, which is also often translated as holiday or festivity. Come inside.
All my stuff is over there.
Okay, bring all your stuff and come inside and join us. We want to see your face in the place. طيب. So al-Eid in Arabic is commonly translated as a holiday or a celebration or a festivity. And it comes from the verb ada ya'udu, which means to return or to recur or reoccur. And the Islamic meaning of this word Eid is largely drawn from this meaning, the meaning of reoccurrence or reoccurring. And so a festivity, an Eid in Islam, is a zaman, an occasion, or a makan, a venue, that has this quality of reoccurrence and other characteristics. So basically an Eid in Islam, from the Islamic point of view, we're going to say something is an Eid if it is an occasion, a zaman, or a venue, a makan, which has basically four characteristics. The first characteristic, that primary characteristic, is al-mu'awada, the quality of al-mu'awada, reoccurrence or recurrence. It could recur weekly, could recur monthly, could recur annually, but it's something that it happens repeatedly. It's not a one-off. So for example, if Abdul Samad, he gets married, and I throw a party for him, is that an Eid? No, because inshallah, it's just going to happen this one time, right? That's not an Eid, right? It's not something that's going to happen every week, every month, every year. So the first quality is recurrence. The second characteristic is أن يكون مقصودا لذاته. It is something which is intended or targeted in and of itself. The date or the venue is intended in and of itself, meaning this Eid, this holiday, this festivity, it can't occur on any other day. It can't occur at any other place. For example, the 4th of July, National Independence Day. Can't be celebrated on the 1st, can't be celebrated on the 5th. Has to be celebrated when? On the 4th. The 4th of July. Can't be the 4th of August. That day is maqsood li dhati. It's desired, it's targeted in and of itself. The 4th Thursday of November for Thanksgiving has to be, can't be the 3rd Thursday, can't be the 2nd Thursday, it has to be the 4th Thursday. That date is targeted in and of itself. 25th of December for Christmas. That date is targeted in and of itself. Can't be the 26th, can't be the 19th, has to be the 25th. The third characteristic of an Eid is al-ijtima'. That it's either an occasion, a zaman, or a makan, a venue, where people gather, or on which people gather. And that time or place is the catalyst. It is the motive for the gathering. So for example, when you look at some of the holidays we just mentioned, the 4th of July, people do what? They get together. Is that not so? Thanksgiving, people get together. And they get together because it's Thanksgiving. It's because it's the 4th of July. That time is a time that causes people to assemble. Also, we have certain venues, certain places where people gather at that place because of the place. The place itself is the motivation for gathering. I'll give you an example. A memorial. So for example, last year when George Floyd was murdered by a police officer who kneeled on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, the place where he was murdered was turned into a memorial. Now this is a place before his murder. It was a place which was rife. It was an area, a neighborhood which was rife with crime. And there was a lot of gang-related activity. Nobody would go there who didn't have to go there. But after his murder, people traveled from all over the country to visit his memorial. And his memorial became an Eid. It became a place where people visited it because of what? Because of that memorial. So, and people would gather there and they would do certain things there. So, the reason why they gathered at this place, or the reason why they gather is because of what? Because of this being considered a special place. Makes it, from the Islamic point of view, an Eid. طيب, ثم بعد ذلك, the fourth characteristic, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. The fourth characteristic of an Eid, the fourth and final one, is that it's a time or a place where certain traditions are always observed. Those traditions, those practices, they go hand in hand with that time or that place. So we gave the example of 25th of December, Christmas, that there are certain traditions that go hand in hand with that date, like the Christmas tree, and decorating, and gift giving, and feasting, and assembling, right? These are certain things that go hand in hand. You can't have Christmas without what? These traditions. Al-Muhim, if you can check all of these boxes from the Islamic point of view, you have an Eid. That day, or that occasion, or that place is called an Eid from the Islamic point of view. طيب, from the Islamic point of view, al-A'yad, the Eids, are two categories. Islam divides Eid into two categories. The first one is غير تعبدية. It's those Eids, those A'yad, which are non-devotional. They are not religiously motivated. They have no religious significance. They have nothing to do with religion. Like we gave the example of the 4th of July. It has nothing to do with religion. And the reason for it, the motive for it, is not a religious one. But the second one is ta'abudiyah, which means devotional. Means that it's religiously motivated and it's related somehow or some way to some type of belief or some type of religious practice. So that's how Islam views al-a'yad. You check these four boxes, and then when you check those four boxes, those a'yad that qualify are going to be divided into two categories. Those which are non-devotional and those which are devotional. Like, what does Islam say about al-a'yad? What is the ruling of holidays and festivals and celebration in Islam? The general rule in Islam is that all a'yad, all festivals, all celebrations, all holidays are prohibited in Islam. That's the general ruling. Unless we have specific evidence that a specific holiday is permitted. So if a person says, what is the ruling of a Muslim celebrating Christmas? We would say, it's not permissible. Why? Because it's a holiday. You can check all four boxes. And holidays in Islam are impermissible unless we have specific evidence to permit them. You guys see that? That's how that works. Like Tanbihan, there's two important notes then. If we understand this, that the general rule when it comes to holidays, they're prohibited, then there's two important things to note. The first one is that this includes any and every venue, makan, or occasion, zaman, that qualifies, that you can tick all four boxes. Any Eid that qualifies as an Eid from the Islamic point of view would be prohibited. That includes birthdays. Is a birthday an Eid?
Yeah.
Because you can check all four boxes, right? That includes wedding anniversaries. That includes Valentine's Day, and Mother's Day, and Father's Day. All of those are considered a'yad, and all of them would be prohibited, even though they're not ta'abudiyah, they're not devotional. Because the asl, the original rule when it comes to holidays in Islam is that they're prohibited, irrespective of whether devotional or non-devotional. The second tanbih, the second note, is that if we understand that the original rule is that holidays are prohibited, that means that if any Muslim were to come and say, hey, this holiday, you can celebrate. This holiday is an exception to the rule. Then the burden of proof would be on the one who says it's okay or the one who says it's prohibited. Which one?
No one says okay.
So the one who says it's okay, the burden of proof would be on him to prove it's an exception to the rule, right? Because we have established a general rule of thumb. So now if you're going to make an exception to the rule, the burden of proof will be on you to justify, to support, to substantiate the exception. You guys see that? So in the case, for example, of celebrating the Prophet's birthday, would celebrating the Prophet's birthday, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would that be considered an Eid?
Yes.
Yeah, think about it. Recurs, right? Every year, the date that the Prophet allegedly or supposedly was born, it recurs, right? That's the first box. Second box is that the date itself is intended in and of itself. So for example, they said the Prophet was born on Monday, and some of them say he was born on the 12th of Rabi'ul al-Awwal. Some people say the 2nd of Rabi'ul al-Awwal. Al-Muhim, whatever date they say, they intend that date to be the date that it's celebrated. They don't celebrate in Muharram, do they? They don't celebrate it in Ramadan, do they? They always celebrate at the same time of year, so again, the date is maqsood bi dhati. The third one, al-ijtima'. Do they get together for that? Yeah, they get together. Big gatherings, right? It's a big deal. And last but not least, do they have certain customs and traditions that they engage in at that time? Of course they do. There's certain songs they sing, certain poetry they recite, certain things that they do. Al-Muhim, it's an Eid. So if somebody says it's okay to celebrate the Prophet's birthday, that's an exception to the rule. We say the burden of proof is on who? The person who permits it. You guys see that? Because the asl is at-tahrim. Like what's the proof? What's the daleel that the original rule when it comes to al-a'yad? Wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What's the proof that the original rule is that they're prohibited? ما ثبت عند أبي داود من حديث أنس أنه قال قدم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم المدينة ولهم يومان يلعبون فيهما فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هذان اليومان؟ قالوا يومان كنا نلعب فيهما في الجاهلية فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله قد أبدلكم بهما خيرا منهما يوم الفطر ويوم al-Adha. So in this hadith, Anas ibn Malik reports that the Prophet when he arrived in Medina, they used to celebrate 2 days. They had 2 holidays that they celebrated. And when the Prophet saw them celebrating these 2 days, he asked them, Ma hadan yawman? What are these 2 days that I see you celebrating? So they said, these are 2 days that we used to celebrate in Jahiliyyah. Before we became Muslims, we used to celebrate. And we used to observe these 2 days as a holiday, a day of festival and festivities and celebration. So the Prophet said, Inna Allah qad abdalakum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has exchanged these 2 days with 2 days which are superior to them, more virtuous than them, better than them. Yawm al-Fitr, the day of fast breaking. Wa Yawm al-Adha, the day of sacrifice. So I'm going to ask you guys a quick question. Have you ever gone and bought something? And then when you got it home and tried it on, a pair of shoes, a shirt, a pair of pants, it wasn't the right size, or it wasn't the right color, or it was something that wasn't right about that. Has that ever happened to you? Mumtaz. Come on, Jibril, you never bought nothing that didn't fit? Yes, you have.
You got dressing rooms.
Yeah, not in the era of COVID. You can't go in the dressing room. You can't try anything
I
on.
don't buy nothing.
Wait.
Come on.
So we buy something, and it doesn't. What we go back, we want the item, just the size isn't right, or the color isn't right, or maybe a button is broken off on it, or something like that. So we go back and we want to get the same item, but we want to get the right size, get the one that doesn't have the fault or defect. So what do? We exchange. Like when you exchange, walaikum salam. When you exchange and you leave the store, do you leave the store with 2 shirts or two pairs of shoes? Or one? Mumtaz. So you have to give something and then what?
Take something.
And take something. So when the Prophet used the word abdalakum, Allah has what? Has exchanged. What was he in effect telling the companions? You have to take these 2 days, Yawm al-Fitr wa Yawm al-Adha, and leave what? Leave these 2 days. These are your holidays, and all of the holidays you're supposed to what? Abandon. You guys see that? And so in this way, the Prophet ﷺ, in a very strong way, is telling the companions all of the holidays besides these 2 holidays are prohibited. You guys see that? Tayyib. So that means that a holiday, irrespective of whether it's devotional, ta'abudiyah, or non-devotional, ghayr ta'abudiyah, it will be prohibited. Because some people, what they do is they say, oh, well, we can't do the religious ones. We can't do Easter and Thanksgiving, but we can do so we can't do Easter and Christmas, but we can do Thanksgiving. We can do 4th of July. No. The statement of the Prophet is general, encompasses all holidays. So if you understand this, you understand the next point, and that is that in Islam, we have how many holidays? And those holidays, as we saw in the hadith of Anas, are Yawm al-Fitr, the day of fast breaking, which is upon us, inshallah ta'ala, Wednesday or Thursday of next week. And the day of what? An-Nahr, or Al-Adha, day of sacrifice. And if you like, we have a third holiday. And that holiday is Al-Jumu'ah. The holiday of what? Friday, a weekly holiday. And the Prophet ﷺ actually referred to Al-Jumu'ah as what? As a holiday. He said in the hadith like by Ibn Majah, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, he said, إِنَّ هَذَا يَوْمُ عِيدٍ جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ فَمَنْ جَاءَهُ الْجُمْعَةِ فَلْيَغْتَسِلْ. He said, this is a day of festivity, a day of celebration, a holiday for the Muslims, meaning Al-Jumu'ah. So whoever reaches the day of Friday, then let him take a bath. So Friday is definitely a holiday for us, a weekly holiday, and we have 2 annual holidays, Yawm al-Fitr wa Yawm al-Adha. Like now, let's talk about some of those rules and regulations, some of the do's and don'ts, some of the nuts and bolts of observing the Eid, as well as some of the etiquette, some of the best practices, some of the things that we do them will get more reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first rule or regulation is that fasting on the day of Eid is prohibited. We're not allowed to fast on the day of Eid, whether it be Yawm al-Fitr or Yawm al-Adha. Not allowed to fast. وَدُلِّ ذَلِكَ, this is evidenced by the hadith like by Muslim on authority of Abu Hurairah and Al-Bukhari on authority of Abi Sa'id al-Khudri, in which the Prophet said, or in which they both said, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى عن صيام يومين يوم الفطر ويوم النحر. The Prophet prohibited fasting on 2 days. Told the Muslims, you cannot fast on these days. One of them being the day of fast breaking, and the second one being the day of sacrifice. The second etiquette is that when the day of Eid comes, and we want to prepare ourselves for Eid, it is highly recommended that we prepare ourselves by taking a complete bath, taking a shower. And this is something which is highly encouraged and something which is recommended by the scholars regardless of school of thought. All the scholars recommend that a person on the day of Eid takes a shower. And Ibn Umar, radiallahu anhu, it was his regular practice that when the day of Eid came, he would always do what? Take a bath. طيب. The next etiquette is that in addition to taking a bath or a shower, we should groom ourselves. And we know that we have some specific personal hygiene recommendations or practices in Islam, like the trimming of our fingernails. And for men, the trimming of the mustache. And, taking certain hair from different parts of the body. So these practices are practices which are recommended for us to observe, grooming ourselves on the day of Eid. In addition to that, on the day of Eid, we should wear the finest clothing that we have available. Wear the nicest things that we have available. This is what we put on for the day of Eid. And it's recommended for men, not for women, that they put on some fragrance, some fragrant oils or cologne, etc. Not for women, because women should not come out of their homes smelling of what? Of fragrance. So the first two are applicable to men and women. The last one, fragrance, is applicable to men only. And all of these are recommended according to the Imams of the Madhahib al-Arba, the four schools of juristic thought. And this is supported, this beautifying yourself, just generally beautifying yourself and grooming yourself for Eid is something which is supported by the hadith by Bukhari. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar, in which he said, I want you guys to pay attention, I want you to tell me how this hadith proves the point. So in this hadith, Ibn Umar, he said, أخذ عمر رضي الله عنه جبة في السوق من استبرق فقال لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يا رسول الله اتبع هذه تجمل بها للعيد وللوفود. So Umar was in the market and he saw this nice cloak made of silk brocade. Just imagine this nice garment, shiny, very attractive, very well tailored, embroidered, made of silk brocade. He said, oh, Messenger, you have to buy this so that you can adorn yourself, beautify yourself for Eid and for the delegates, for the delegations that will come and visit you. When the delegations come, when the delegates come, you can put on this nice robe to receive them. So the Prophet replied, he said, هذا لباس من لا خلق له. He said, this is the garment or the clothing worn by the people who will have no share in the hereafter. So I want to ask you, how does this hadith show us that it's recommended for us to beautify ourselves and adorn ourselves for Eid? Because he told him, I can't wear that. That's the clothing of the people who have no share in the hereafter. How does that show that, yeah, you should beautify yourself on Eid? Any takers?
You shouldn't wear silk though.
Huh?
Men shouldn't wear silk.
Okay. Kembil, you're doing good.
But since the Umar radiallahu anhu told him you should beautify yourself.
And he tacitly what?
He told him.
He tacitly approved of what he said. So this is what we call iqrar juz'i. The Prophet, it's not about what the Prophet did say, it's about what he didn't say. He didn't say, oh no, we're not supposed to beautify ourselves on Eid. We're supposed to look humble and simple on Eid. He's agreeing with Umar. He's tacitly approving. Yeah, we should look good. But I just can't wear that. You guys see that? And so this actually hadith was mentioned by Bukhari under the chapter in which he said, Babul Eidain wa tajammul lahuma. He said the chapter of the two Eids and beautifying yourself for them. So Al-Bukhari understood from this hadith that it was a approval of the Prophet, a tacit approval that, yeah, you're supposed to beautify yourself, but we just can't wear silk. But from the etiquettes of Eid al-Fitr. specifically, is that we should always eat something before departing our homes for Salat al-Eid. And this is proven by the hadith collected by Bukhari in the authority of Anas, in which he said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يغدو يوم الفطر حتى يأكل تمرات وفي رواية يأكلهن وترا. So he said that the Prophet ﷺ, he would never leave his home to go and offer the Eid prayer without eating some dates. And in one version he said he would eat an odd number of dates. And the Prophet would do this for one reason, or one of the hikam, one of the reasons why he did that, لِإِظْهَارِ الْفِطْر, to make it abundantly clear that he was not fasting, because you're not supposed to fast on the Eid day. You guys see that? So the Prophet would make it a point, and we should make it a point. You might say, well, I'm gonna go to Eid, and they're gonna have breakfast, and I really want to get my Eid on, right? So I don't want to have anything in my stomach. No, you can take a date. You can take 3 dates. You can take 5 dates and eat those, and follow the sunnah, and still come to the Eid and get your Eid on, right? طيب. Because that's the sunnah, and we'll get the blessings from Allah and the reward from Allah for following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam. طيب. Another etiquette from the etiquettes of Eid al-Fitr is the takbir, declaring Allah's greatness on the day of Eid al-Fitr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, in the ayat, in the context of fasting, He says, وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ. He says, rather He wants you to complete the prescribed period and to declare His greatness, to make takbir out of appreciation for that which, or that to which He has guided you. So the Muslims are highly encouraged on the day of Eid to make this takbir. And it's sad because it's become almost a sunnah matruka. It's a thing where people leave their homes and they're silent. They're driving in the car to the Eid and everybody's just quiet. Or maybe they're just talking about what they're going to do the rest of the day. They're not making takbir. And they get there, and then there's usually somebody on the mic making this takbir, and people are reciting it. And so some people will just recite along with that person, which they shouldn't do. Everybody should recite individually, not in unison, because you want it to be an ibadah which your heart and soul is into it. And if you just sing along, then it won't be the same as if you what? If you recite it from yourself, glorifying Allah from min qalb, from your heart. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right? And then after that, pretty soon, people are not following anymore. People are just sitting there waiting, and they're not even reciting along with the one who's even saying it for them to say it in unison. And so this shouldn't be the case. The Muslims are supposed to make a takbir for the day of Eid. Now the question comes, when do they start making takbir and when should they stop? So some of the scholars, like as-Saafiy, rahimahullah ta'ala, they say that you begin the takbir the evening of the Eid. And we know that in Islam, the night precedes the day. So at Maghrib, that will actually begin the day of what? Of Eid. So as-Saafiy was of the opinion that you start from Maghrib. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. You start from that time. Other scholars like Abu Hanifa, Malik, Ahmed, and others, they said, no, you start from what? You start from the time you leave your home on the morning of Eid. And you continue making takbir until the Imam comes out to lead the salat and give the khutbah. And then you stop making takbir. That's the opinion of the majority of the scholars of Islam. And they support it with the athar, the narration from Ibn Umar, أنه كان, in its authentic narration, أنه كان إذا خرج من بيته يكبر واستمر يكبر إلى أن يخرج الإمام إلى المصلى. So he would leave his home and he would begin making takbir. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. And he would continue doing that until he got to the musalla, and then continue doing that until the Imam came out, and then he would stop. And Ashab Rasulullah, the companions of Muhammad ﷺ, they are the best qualified and capable to interpret the Quran. What did Allah mean when He said, وَلِتُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ, and that you make the takbir at the end of the muddah. What did that mean? When should that start? Who's best able to interpret that for us? Ashab Rasulullah. And the ahadith of Rasulullah, his own practice, who's best able to follow that and convey it to us? The companions, because they walked with Rasulullah. So when we have a companion like Ibn Umar who was known to strictly follow the sunnah, he begins his takbir when? When he leaves his home, not the night before. And he stops the takbir when the imam comes out, and he doesn't continue it for the rest of the day. It means that this is the muddah, this is the period in which we should make the takbir. Like another important etiquette is the method of takbir. So when we make a takbir, there are different siyagh, different formulas that people use. But what formula should we use? There are two well-known, confirmed formulas from the companions of Muhammad. One of them is the takbir of Salman al-Farisi, who used to say, "Can you kabbir Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, kabira." Let's say that. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, kabira. So that's one form of takbir, authentically narrated from Salman al-Farisi. Use that one. Another one, the more famous one, the more common one that most of us say, is the one of Ibn Mas'ud, who used to say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and some people say he said it 3 times. La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd. Let's do that one. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd. Mumtaz. So these two, and you should what? Alternate. And use them. And don't follow the takbir of anyone else. Bring the takbir from what? From your heart. And glorify Allah. Be mindful when you're saying it. Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest. Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest. La ilaha illallah. There's no deity worthy of worship except Him. And so on. But ثم بعد ذلك, from the etiquettes, is walking to the musalla. Walking to the place where the prayer is going to be observed. And this is something which is confirmed authentically from Ali ibn Abi Talib, in which he said, من السنة يوم العيد أن تخرج إلى المصلى ماشيا. He said it is from the sunnah on Yawm al-Eid to go to the place where the prayer is going to be observed walking. And At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, who collected this narration from Ali, he said, وَالْعَمَلُ عَلَى هَذَا عِنْدَ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ يَسْتَحِبُّونَ أن يخرج الرجل إلى العيد ماشيا ويستحبون أن لا يركب إلا من عذر. He said at Tirmidhi, he said that the scholars of Islam generally, they act and give verdicts in accordance with this statement of Ali. They encourage the person who's going to go for the prayer of Eid to go walking. And they discourage him to go driving or riding, except if he has an excuse. Now, most people, they're going to be coming from very far away. So walking is something which is not plausible, right? But you still can what? You can park some distance away so that you end up walking the rest of the way, and you get the ajr of following the sunnah and the ajr of walking. Now we come to an important issue for those people who they're concerned about whether or not their schedule will permit them to attend Salat al-Eid, and they're worried about whether or not it's obligatory or simply recommended. They're worried about the hukm of Salat al-Eid because they don't want to not come, and not coming is a sin. So is Salat al-Eid wajibah? Is it obligatory? Or is it mustahabba? Is it simply recommended? طيب. Abu Hanifa and Ahmad fi riwayah. In one version from Ahmad, one opinion attributed to Ahmad, they are of the opinion that Salat al-Eid is wajibah. You have to come. If you don't come, and you don't have an excuse, a valid excuse, you'll be sinful. And they support that with the hadith. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. They support that with the hadith collected by Bukhari on the authority of Ummatiyyah, in which she said, Amarana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam أن نخرجهن يوم الفطر ويوم الأضحى العواتق والحيض وذوات الخدور فأما الحيض فيعتزلن المصلى ويشهدن الخير ودعوة المسلمين. So she said, Umatiyya, she said that the Prophet ﷺ commanded us. Underscore the word commanded. Commanded us to ensure the attendance, to make sure that these people attended the Eid of Fitr and the Eid of sacrifice. Then he mentioned the people that the Prophet wanted to make sure that they were in attendance. Al-Awatiq, young girls. Wal-Huyab, menstruating women. Women who are not going to pray. Wa-Dhawat al-Khudur, women who are behind veils. They're eligible bachelorettes awaiting proposals, who typically don't come out. He wanted them to come out as well. وَيَعْتَزِلْنَا الْحُيَّضْ الْمُصَلَّى, and the women who are menstruating should simply refrain from praying, but they should witness the festivities and the supplication, participate in the supplication of the Muslims. So Atiyya, she goes on to say, O Messenger of Allah, some women don't have clothes. They don't have outer garments to cover themselves properly, appropriately. So the Prophet said, let them borrow garments from other women, or let those women who are coming, let them cover them with their garments. So they have these big garments, let them what? Share the garment with another sister and go out together, both covered by the same garment. Look how emphatically the Prophet is stressing and emphasizing these women come out for prayer. So they use this to say, look, if the Prophet is this emphatic about women coming to prayer, then even more so, it must be obligatory on who to come? On men to come. This is their logic. Like the second group of scholars, Malik al-Shafi'i and Ahmad fil mashhuri anhu. The most famous opinion of Ahmad is that it's recommended and not obligatory. They point to the fact that the scholars of Islam are agreed that Salat al-Eid is recommended for women and not obligatory. And if the Prophet directed the command at women, and it's agreed by the scholars that that command is a command of encouragement, not a command of obligation, then it's also, if it's not obligatory for them and they were commanded, it's not obligatory for those who were not mentioned in the hadith. You guys see that? And Allah knows best, this is the correct opinion. It's highly recommended but not obligatory. So if a person can't make it, simply cannot make it, they have an excuse, they shouldn't feel sinful. They have not sinned. But if they can make it, they should make it because it is such a stressed and emphasized sunnah in Islam. طيب, the timing of the prayer. The scholars of Islam are agreed, according to Ibn Rushd and Ibn Qattan, that Salat al-Eid, the timing of it, it begins from Tulu al-Shams, when the sun rises, until az-Zawal, when the sun passes the meridian and we enter the midday. That's the time slot for Eid. That's going to be important in a second when we talk about something else. The Eid prayer, the asl, the original rule is that it should be offered in what? In congregation. All the Muslims should gather in one place and offer Salat al-Eid in congregation, ijma'an. Ibn Qudamah, he mentioned the ijma' of the scholars that the Muslims, al-asl, is that Salat al-Eid should be offered in congregation. And that's because the Prophet ﷺ, he always offered Salat al-Eid in congregation in the Musalla, and he never offered it where? In the masjid. He always would gather outside of the masjid, and the Muslims would gather together, a large gathering, and they would pray Salat al-Eid. And the only time he prayed in the masjid was if there was inclement weather. وثبت عن علي رضي الله عنه, it's been confirmedly or authentically reported from Ali that he said one time he himself went out to lead Salat al-Eid. And he went out to the Musalla. And he was reported to have said, or he was heard saying, لو لا أنها السنة لصليت في المسجد. He said, if it were not that this is the sunnah, to go out and pray, I would have prayed in the masjid. But I'm going to go out because why? That's what the Prophet did. طيب. Now we said that you should, it's recommended that we pray in congregation, we pray outside of the masjid. But suppose a person is unable to attend Salat al-Eid with the Muslims. Can that person and should that person pray individually? For example, there are certain situations where a person just can't make it. So for example, let's say like last year, there's a lockdown. Last year there were people in certain communities where you couldn't even go out. There were shelter-in-place orders. You couldn't even go out unless you had a specific reason you were going out for. And even if you could go out, you couldn't gather. So there were people who, because of lockdowns and because of other restrictions, they couldn't gather for Salat al-Eid. You may have a situation where a person just simply forgets that that day is Eid and that there's an Eid prayer, etc. And by the time they realize it, the prayer is already over. Person may oversleep. Person may be a traveler. Person has business. They have to travel on that day. They have an early flight, 6 a.m. and they're going to be traveling most of the morning or the day and unable to be in a place where Muslims are going to gather and offer Salat and Eid. Person could be sick and worried about infecting others, or worry about himself, his condition getting worse because he exposed himself to other people, comes out of his home, etc. A person may have to work. He just can't get off that day. He might work in a place where he's a team member and there's set schedules 6 months in advance. And if you're on, you're on. On call, for example. And that day he's on call and he couldn't get anybody to switch with him, he's got to work. People in these circumstances who can't make it, should they pray Salat al-Eid individually? Can they and should they pray Salat al-Eid individually? What do you guys think? Is it all or nothing? Or can you pray Salat al-Eid by yourself? Munfaridan. Ahsan, you can. And the proof for that is the hadith collected by Bukhari, allaqahu, and Ibn Abi Shayba wassalahu bi sanadin sahih, with an authentic chain, in which he said, Anas كان إذا فاتته صلاة العيد مع الإمام جمع أهله فصلى معهم صلاة العيد مثل صلاة الإمام يوم العيد مثل صلاة الإمام يوم العيد. That Anas, if he ever missed the Salat al-Eid, he would gather his family, collect them all together, and he would lead them in the Eid prayer and pray the prayer exactly how the Imam would normally pray it for Salat al-Eid. So what does that tell you? That if you miss the prayer with the Muslims, you still can what? Can pray it. And when you pray it, it's encouraged that you pray it in congregation if you can. So let's say, for example, a person, a head of a household, misses the prayer and along with his family, they all oversleep. He should what? Gather them and they should pray. If a person had that work situation, on call, then he what? When he gets time, somewhere in that time frame we said, between Tulu al-Shams, sunrise, and a Zawal, at some time if he gets a break, he what? He prays Salat al-Eid individually. When he prays, he should pray it exactly the way we pray it with the Imam. So nothing should change, and we know that because that's how Anas prayed it. And we all know the specific qualities of the Salat, but we'll just repeat them really quickly. So make sure that it falls within the time. You have to conform with the time that we mentioned. You can't pray it after Dhuhr. You have to pray it in that time frame we just mentioned. There should be no adhan and no iqamah. As Jabir, he said, Sallaytu al-Eidaini مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم غير مرة ولا مرتين فبدأ بالصلاة قبل الخطبة بلا أذان ولا إقامة. He said, I prayed with the Prophet the 2 Eids, al-Fitr wal-Adha, a number of times. And he always began with the prayer before the khutbah, and he always did so without an adhan and without an iqamah. How many units should you pray? How many units should you pray? How many rak'ah? How many rak'ah? 2. Ahsant. And how many takbirs in the first unit? 7. So just like you make 7 takbirs with the imam, you'll make 7 if you prayed it alone or with your family. And when you rise for the second rak'ah, it'll be 6, right? There'll be 1 for intiqal and then 5, a total of 6. And then with each takbir, you're going to do what? You're going to raise your hands. And when you recite it, you're going to recite silently or audibly? Audibly, out loud. And it's recommended for you as an individual, just like it's recommended with the imam, that you recite al-A'la, Surah al-A'la in the first rak'ah and Surah al-Ghashiyah in the second rak'ah. Everything like you do it with the imam. Like, what about khutbah al-Eid? Person has to work, but they take an hour. In the early part of the job, they say, hey, I'm going to be an hour late. So I'm going to be able to come, get the salat, and after the salat, I need to leave. Can they do that, or do they have to sit for the khutbah?
They should say.
Yes,
They should, but do they have to? If they get up and leave, are they sinning? Or if there's a brother across, for example, after the salah is over and the imam is getting up to starts giving his khutbah, there's a brother that you haven't seen in years. And you get up and you, here he's, and you start, are you sinning by talking while the imam is giving the khutbah? Now, I'm not saying you should do that. There's a difference between should and can't. You can see that? So the fact of the matter, the khutbah itself is recommended. If the imam came, led the salah, and then left, there would be nothing wrong with that. Because the khutbah itself is what? Mustahabba, bil ijma'. So if the khutbah itself is mustahabba, sitting for the khutbah has to be mustahabba. It can't be wajib. The next etiquette, and we're going to finish in time, inshallah ta'ala. I got like 2-3 minutes and we'll be done. And I think the adhan today is like 15, 16, something like that.
12.
12?
12.
No, it's 12. You're using the wrong, using something early, man. You're trying to get over. Shave a minute off your fast or whatever. 15, I see. I told you. I'm almost done anyway. I'll be done by then anyway. By your 12, your early 12. Okay. So the next etiquette is greeting each other. Greeting each other for Yom al-Eid, congratulating each other. Ibn Hajar, he mentioned in Fath al-Bari, an authentic hadith on the authority of Jubair ibn Nufayr. قال كان أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا لقي بعضهم بعضا في يوم العيد يقول بعضهم لبعض تقبل الله منا ومنكم. So whenever they would meet, the companions of Muhammad ﷺ, whenever they would meet on the day of Eid, they would congratulate each other. And they would say, may Allah accept from us and from you. So it's recommended that on Yawm al-Eid, that when you meet your brother, you say, تَقَبَّلَ اللَّهُ مِنَّا وَمِنْكُمْ. The next etiquette is returning from a different route. مُخَالَفَةُ الطَّرِيقِ. So when you go for Eid, you go from one route. But when you come back, you take a different route. Jabir ibn Abdullah, he mentioned, إذا خرج كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يوم العيد إذا خرج خالف الطريق أو كما قال. He said the Prophet whenever he would go out for Salat al-Eid, he would do what? He would take a different route, going and returning. Then by that, the last etiquette, last one, within time, is darb ad-duf, beating the hand drum. You guys know what a hand drum is?
Yeah.
A duf. Is it that? You doing like that Congo thing, man. And I've seen people, I've seen people, I remember when I was, not long after I was Muslim, there was like an Eid gathering for men, and they had these big Congo drums they were beating, like, bo, 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 and they were like really getting down. It was like a jam session. Allah musta'an wa alayhi tuklan. But no, the duf, you guys know what a tambourine is, right? Picture a tambourine. Minus the cymbals. Tambourine minus the cymbals, that's what? That's a duf. It's like this little round thing, about maybe this high.
With the skin.
Right, with the skin on you. And it makes like noise, You get it, right? That's the duf. Duf is not what? Those big bongo drums, that's not duf. That's a tabla, right? That's a drum. What's the ruling of the duf itself? The first thing I want to say, and it's important, I want to begin with the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, Khalif al-Bukhari, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, he said, لَيَكُونَنَّ مِنْ أُمَّتِ أَقْوَامٌ. يستحلون الحيرة والحريرة والخمرة والمعازف. He said there's going to be people from my ummah. And he said aqwam, like lots of people. Not a small number of people, lots of people. Who are going to legalize al-hira, illicit intercourse. Wal-harira, silk for men. Wal-khamra, intoxicants, alcoholic beverages. Wal-ma'azif, and musical instruments. وثبت عن ابن Abbas, it's been authentically narrated from Ibn Abbas, he said, ad-duf haram, the hand drum is haram. Wal-ma'azif haram, musical instruments generally are haram. Wal-kuba, drums, those big bongo drums are haram. Wal-mizmar, al-mizmar haram, and these wind instruments are what? Are haram. So that tells you that the general rule when it comes to instruments generally is what? They're prohibited. But we have a hadith, the hadith of Aisha, in which she mentioned, دخل أبو بكر وعندي جاريتان من جواري الأنصار تغنيان وتضربان الدف وليستا مغنيتين. She said, one day Abu Bakr came into my home and there were two young girls from the Ansar. They were beating the hand drum and they were singing, but they weren't professional singers. They weren't good at it, but they were doing their best. فقال أبو بكر أمزامير الشيطان في بيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, the instruments of the devil in the house of the Messenger of Allah, and the Messenger of Allah, وَكَانَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ مَوْجُودًا. And Aisha, she said, وَكَانَ يَوْمَ عِيدٍ. She said, that happened on one of the Eids. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دعهما يا أبا بكر فإن لكل قوم عيدا وهذا عيدنا. He said, leave him alone, Abu Bakr. Because every people have an Eid, a day of festivity and festival and celebration. And this is our Eid. So the scholars of Islam, like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, and Al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, they explained that this hadith is an exception to the general rule, and the exception is the one where three boxes can be ticked. The first exception is zamani. It has to do with the time. When is it permissible? On Yom and Eid. It also has to do with the people who are going to engage in it. An-nisa, women, not men, beating on bongo drums and having a jam session. And it also has to do with the instrument itself. There's only one instrument that is there's an exception to the rule. What instrument is that? The duf. That's it. Not bongo drums, not flutes, which lets you know what people do on Eid when they say, hey, we can play music on Eid. And you'll actually have people who will bring a DJ. And they're, playing and doing this, that, and the third. That's haram. Because the exception is those three. And with that, we'll come to a close. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.